Okay, now we'd like to welcome Lisa Slaughter for the ABCs of American Surrogacy. Lisa is a parent herself through gestational surrogacy. Lisa decided to combine her passion for the law and her background in infertility to found the Fertility Law Center. Welcome, Lisa.
Good afternoon, everybody. I thought about reading off a series of disclaimers very quickly to give you an idea of American law, but the jet lag has got me, so I'm not able to do that. I'm a former intended parent and an attorney long before I was a former intended parent, and want to walk you through the ABCs, some of the most basic things that you need to consider legally, both when you're picking an agency and going through the process. I've received a number of questions as well regarding immigration, and that's not an area that I'm an expert in, but I usually actually work with Stephen Page here in Australia, who's unfortunately not here. I just saw him at another legal conference, but some of the immigration issues are being resolved much more easily for Australian citizens, and it's a much simpler process than it used to be, I will tell you that much. The first question, and I know a lot of this has been touched on, how do I find a surrogate? There are two ways, as you know. There's the agency route, and you've seen Kim Bergman and Karen Cisnew speak from the American component, and then there's also the independent and the in-house. Let me tell you first, agencies in America are not, and I'm speaking for California, and I think this would apply to the other states where surrogacy is legal and there is what we refer to as commercial surrogacy. Agencies are not regulated. I'm licensed by the state bar. If I do something wrong, I have a very high fiduciary duty to you as my client of confidentiality, of advocacy, etc. If I do something wrong, you report me to the state bar, you sue me, I have insurance, you have some recourse. The same with the doctor, not the same with the agency. So while there are very reputable agencies out there that have been, and you heard a couple of them today, who've been out there for a long time, there are other agencies who are started by surrogates, which are fine, but some of them don't have a certain amount of experience. Some of them are maybe started by former intended parents, which is fine and great as well. But again, it's experience, it's longevity, it's business savvy. They're taking a lot of your money, so know who you're dealing with in terms of, you know, a Google search is sometimes your most powerful tool for research here when you're looking at agencies all across the United States. Escrow companies, for example, have to be bonded because you'll be putting money in escrow if you use an American surrogacy, if you go through the American surrogacy process. So it's really interesting that no regulations so far have really come up, at least in the state of California, regarding regulating and licensing agencies. There's talk about it, but so far there's not been much progress on that. So on the independent route, there are a number of fertility clinics who also have in-house surrogate programs. Those can be great, but it's also like doing a trip to a country without a guide. So imagine your agency is that guide. If you have the ability, you have the time, you have the savvy, you can do that. It is not easy. I have a number of international clients who actually do that route because they found a surrogate or they like a donor or a clinic's in-house surrogate or program, and it can save you a considerable amount of money. But they do rely on the attorneys quite a bit, which is fine. Most of us work on a flat fee or a reasonable hourly basis, but still you will need that support to navigate that process. The other is in terms of the agency, the advantages, and one of the things I as an attorney do for you if you've retained, if you're working with the surrogate in America, is one of my fiduciary duties is to preserve your relationship with the surrogate at all times. That should be a happy. If there's a misunderstanding, I want to be the bad guy. You know, blame me. I've often said to clients, well, blame it on me. I want to preserve your relationship with it. Again, and that's part of that process, is to have that intermediary. Hopefully it'll never get to that point, but an intermediary to really kind of help solve any issues that might come up. Some of them are as simple as clarification on a contract point, or usually things, and they should be very, very, very well cleared out and detailed in the gestational surrogacy contract. But there is an advantage to having that intermediary. For example, in my contracts, and most contracts in California are certainly lengthy, anywhere between, I think the shortest I ever saw was 30 pages. Mine end up being about 50 pages. And while I wish you did pay me by the page, because I would make it 100 pages, it's the reason that it's so lengthy is it's detailed. We don't want any surprises. If we can articulate expectations, and you heard that all throughout today, expectations, what are the intended parents' expectations, what are the expectations of the surrogate, if we can outline as many of those expectations as possible, everybody understands in the worst case scenario what's expected of them. When you start matching with the surrogate process, and I have to give credence to the Creative Family Connections who did this map. I did not certainly have the time or the ability to do some of the research that they did. People will sometimes, where the surrogate lives is a critical component, and the savvy agencies know this. You also heard Kim Bergman mention this as well. Where the surrogate lives and who you are as intended parents can make a huge difference. For example, you would not want to pick a surrogate who lives in Arizona if you were a single intended parent, or if you were a same-sex couple using an egg donor. So there are some nuances that really do come into play. And here's an example of how the states will vary according to your sexual orientation, whether you're using a donor or your own genetic material. So it does matter, and that's where you need to retain the use of counsel and where a seasoned agency will make a difference. Unfortunately, I've had couples come to me, they've been matched by an agency, maybe referred to me, and I look at the paperwork and I say, gee whiz, you're a same-sex couple, you've been matched with a surrogate in Arizona, we'll never be able to get a pre-birth order in Arizona, let's go back to the drawing board. And by that time, sometimes you've already spent a lot of money having the surrogate medically cleared, you've signed an agency agreement. I mean, most reputable agencies will rematch you at least once without a cost or a very nominal one. But these are the type of things that you can anticipate ahead of time if you're well-armed and a savvy consumer. I mean, my objective as an attorney is to educate my clients to become savvy consumers of what they're entering into. California, as you heard earlier today, yay, California, we are by far the most, we've got the belt and suspenders to give you all the legal parental rights that you would expect and that you want. We have our birth certificates do not say surrogate, sperm donor, egg donor. It's not there. It just says Johnny and Billy or Susie and Tommy, whoever the intended parents are. And for singles, in fact, I'm working with a single male and a single female from separate countries, and you can place undisclosed or just dashes under, for example, if you're using a sperm donor or if an intended father's using an egg donor. So there are a number of options, as we heard about today. Intent is the directive of California law, which is really fantastic, and we actually are having a new birth certificate come out that just says intended parent 1, or parent number 1, and parent number 2. It doesn't even, eventually it'll get there to where you won't even have mother or father. So essentially what you want to make sure is that two things. One is that your contract can be held up, okay? I've never had a surrogate in all my years of doing this ever want the baby. I've had actually the opposite. I've had surrogates who I represent or their attorneys call and say, where are these intended parents? They are not in the country, and I'm going to be induced on Monday. I do not want a baby. I've got 4 at home, or I have 3. So that's a primary issue. The other is, it also, I mean, worst case scenario, the contract also holds up for the benefit of the surrogate as well, which is I've had intended parents who've gotten divorced in the middle of in the middle of a gestational surrogacy, and the court will uphold that in California under community debt, and both parents are still responsible for that child. So there are tremendous protections built within California law and within this particular industry and regulations that apply. The next thing is, what do I ask a surrogate? Let's say I've matched with the surrogate. It's like it's a blind date you've never experienced. It's a relationship that there are no guidebooks for. It's very interesting, and I've tried to come up with some analogies and some things. I mean, part of it, again, you've heard, is transparency, being direct, and really understanding what it is that you want from this relationship. Part of it is, at the time, I was very busy, and I was working, and my former husband and I were both really busy starting businesses, and I wasn't available. I simply was not available every day or all the time, or as much as some surrogates wanted to communicate. There was also the issue of time difference and time zone, because we looked at surrogates at that time. It was insurance. It was very insurance-based. You wanted a surrogate with really great insurance, which wasn't easy to find at the particular time that we started. So our surrogate was in North Carolina, which was, again, a very favorable, not as favorable as California, but certainly favorable about the birth certificate and what we call finalization of parental rights. The other is special requests. I've had intended parents. Again, nobody really talked about it here today, and I was really disappointed about that, but intended parents tend to be more educated and a little more sophisticated about general things than surrogates. There is a difference in the socioeconomic class for the most part. So I say that to clients to say, if you want your surrogate to eat healthy, okay? Who doesn't? I mean, really, if you're pregnant, you want somebody to eat healthy. Eat healthy to a surrogate may mean something very different to you. It may mean all alkaline water and organics and raw. I mean, it may mean to her less fast food or more fresh fruit or something like that. So make sure that your understanding and expectations are the same. If you have special requests, tell her now. Don't tell her during contract negotiations. I had one parent who wanted the surrogate to play special music and special tapes. There was some research about in utero voice recognition, and they were really into that. And I think the surrogate would have been very open to it had it been discussed ahead of time. But after that, it was a little strange and kind of spooked her a bit. So it did change that dynamic. So speak up. The other thing, too, is termination, reduction, and abortion. Don't think that people go in and, well, that will never happen. Well, hopefully it won't. But have that conversation. If you are concerned about certain genetic components or certain issues, Down syndrome or what have you, and would terminate, make sure that you have talked to the surrogate. I've never experienced a surrogate, and again, that goes to the good matching, that goes to expectations right up front and conversations where a surrogate has refused to either reduce or to terminate. But again, we don't leave it up to the discretion of the parties at the time. It's set forth, like how many will she carry. So if there are triplets, it will be an automatic, so to speak, fetal reduction down to something that's more manageable for both the surrogate and the child's health. So don't be afraid to talk about those issues, because they've got to be addressed. And they will be addressed at the contract phase, but by that point, you've spent a lot of money. You've had the surrogate medically cleared, you've had her psychologically cleared, you've hired an attorney. Wow, that's not the best time to find out it's not a good match. The other thing, too, is the support system. And this is also something to ask your agency. Some agencies do a home visit, some agencies don't. I'm a big proponent of it. Sometimes it's just not financially possible, only because, California is big or the United States are big and it gets more expensive. But your agency might be able to add that on if that's a comfort that you want. The other thing, too, that I found that's kind of interesting, even in this technological age, is communication ability, especially with foreign intended parents who are overseas in different time zones. They expect the surrogate to have Skype, for example, or WeChat, or whatever it is. And some surrogates don't even have a computer. They have no need for one. So if you want to communicate that way with your surrogate, ask her, do you have a computer? Do you have internet at your house? You know, how do you want to communicate? What is it that works for you? I mean, maybe and a lot of surrogates are willing to get that and do that because they do want good communication and they expect communication. The other is, where's Waldo? Understanding American health insurance and surrogacy. Essentially, we've had some big changes in our American health insurance laws on a federal level. And essentially what the Affordable Care Act, or what you may have heard referred to as Obamacare, allows health insurance to anybody regardless of any prior pre-existing condition or the like. The downside is that while it's available to everyone, it's not always available. And the point being is that we now have specific open enrollment periods. And if you don't enroll or retain insurance at that particular point, and those windows are small, the idea being that the government wants everybody to be insured, and if you don't become insured, you get you're penalized on your taxes. If you don't sign up within that time period, absent some real special circumstances, you can't get insurance. That's one of the problems with it now in its application. So, for example, we have obviously, let's say, what is today? This May. Open enrollment is closed for 2015. Okay? So if you came to America today and you said, I want a surrogate, and I need to make sure she has maternity insurance, or she has insurance that will cover the pregnancy. Well, if she doesn't have insurance now, we couldn't apply for most things under the Affordable Care Act. The problem becomes, and insurance companies in America, seizing an opportunity, have created a new product which is called bridging the gap. Okay, so there is that insurance that you pay for between now and when she would have effective insurance, which would be January 2016. So this is where your planning, your finances can actually add up because of timing or planning. If a surrogate may have insurance through her employer, that's a possibility. So I don't want to dissuade you between looking at a surrogate in America between, May and December of 2015. So there are possibilities and there are availabilities, but it is now a serious timing consideration to factor in. And when you're talking with agencies, because you may say to an agency, I want somebody who has insurance now because we're planning a transfer in 3 months. Again, your surrogate is usually seen by your IVF physician up until about the 12th week. And that's typically a cash pay, and surrogate's insurance does not pay for that at all. The surrogate's insurance will pay for the maternity component when she's released to her obstetrician at around week 12. So that's the good and the bad side. The upside is when you do have a surrogate with insurance, it's actually rather inexpensive compared to what it used to be. These surrogates tend to be younger, and the maternity issue is mandatory and covered, so it actually tends to be very affordable. So policies you would see private policies that used to be $400 or $500 are now between $2 and $3. So that's advantageous. When it all works out, these are my kids, sorry, I had to just kind of put them in. We did have twins, which we were happy about, and we also had great insurance and NICU coverage and insurance, American insurance. But that is a consideration too for you. There are more options becoming available now. Even as I speak, I'm getting emails from new insurance brokers saying, well, we are offering newborn insurance. Your child is an American citizen and arguably available and entitled to have insurance. So that somewhat varies. Insurance companies at the end of the day really want to make money, so they're trying to get out of it to a certain extent because they know you're not going to stay for years and pay off that premium. So it's very manageable and navigable, which it wasn't about this time last year. So that's a very positive thing. That is starting to change. And in essence, that's the kind of the key highlights are the where are you going to get your surrogate from and what to ask her, and then the importance of where she is residing and your expectations through that. So I'd be happy to take any questions.
Anyone?
Can I just ask generally, how much is the cost of the process?
Well, I'm going to give you two answers to that. The agency fees, whether or not you go through an agency, those fees run in California, I can speak of, and it may be different in different states, about $15,000 to $30,000, depending on the agency and what they offer. Then there's the surrogate cost, because you're hearing the average, the surrogates are paid a base fee. Okay, that starts to be paid once the surrogate is pregnant and has a pregnancy. So let's say the base fees on average are between $20,000 and $30,000 to $35,000, depending. I mean, if you want a proven surrogate to carry triplets, that's going to cost you more than maybe a first-time surrogate who's willing to carry a singleton. So in addition to that base fee, she's also paid additional fees, like an embryo transfer fee if she has to undergo a cesarean section, that if she's put on bed rest, you're paying her lost wages, which typically in California are supplemented by the state, so they're actually not that much. You're paying like some mileage over 30 miles, so you're paying also all these other fees. Assuming one transfer, because typically there are 3 within an 18-month period contractually, estimating you hit the bullseye on the first transfer, I would say conservatively around $50,000. If you could be slightly under, but if it's more in terms of you're going through a second or third time, and this is excluding clinic costs, this is just the surrogate costs, I would say could be closer to 60 to 70,000. And again, if you have multiples, 80 up. Pardon? Yes. No, traditional surrogacy is rarely done anymore. It really it's rarely done. So, I don't know. In fact, again, it would be somewhat difficult. Agencies really don't offer traditional surrogacy. I see them usually, and I represent clients for them, but almost exclusively family members, where one family member is doing it for another.
And as far as getting embryos over to the States, I mentioned before that they have to go through gene testing, or is that in California as well?
Yes, that's federal, and clinics sometimes have their own requirements in addition to that, but that is the minimum federal standard, the FDA standard.
This is probably a pretty awful question, but sometimes at birth a baby is very severely deformed or something like that, and decisions have to be made by people. Who would make those decisions in that case?
Well, in that case, in California, first of all, you would have done the appropriate prenatal testing, hopefully, and either terminated the pregnancy if the intended parents did not want that child. That child is legally that of the intended parents, and the intended parents are responsible for that child. In no way does it revert back to the surrogate, and in no way should it revert back to the state or the foster care system. So it's up to the intended parents to take that child is legally theirs. We have a court order prior to birth that says it's their financial, legal, and moral responsibility.
Can the surrogate refuse termination at some point? Can they actually agree to it in the beginning? Change their mind?
That's an interesting question, and we have yet to see that case be litigated. I've only heard of that in states where people are kind of do-it-yourself surrogacy kits, from the folks in Minnesota or what have you, or finding surrogates in jurisdictions that they're not having this conversation. There's no psychological clearance. There's no attorney involved. It's a wing and a prayer. And in that particular case, the outcome was the surrogate picked up and went to a state that didn't have surrogacy law, so the contract wasn't recognized. I've never seen that happen, and it's a question of whether or not legally, it's a question of who would prevail, the surrogate because of her own privacy rights or the intended parents because of their own procreation rights. It's never been, that issue's never been decided by the Supreme Court. So I don't want to take that case on. So the matches are good, and that's the importance of the agency and the match, et cetera. And that's why it's any medical reason. I mean, I've had surrogates where I've represented that say, well, I don't want to terminate for this, or I don't want to terminate for that. And that's not a match. That's not a match. If you're there deciding what is medically okay for her to terminate, and you're willing to terminate, say for Down syndrome, you don't want to be in that debate. That's not a good match. The intended parents, there are a lot of women who want to be surrogates for a lot of good reasons. So don't be afraid to say no if a match doesn't sound right or feel right. Does that?
We have time for one more. Okay.
Just back on the insurance thing, does that change when it's twins or multiples?
In terms of the insurance for the newborn? Yeah. No, they don't charge you more if they're twins. But boy, don't tell them that, because they might want to do that now. It's a good idea. They might take that. So no, it doesn't. I'm out in the lobby after, if anyone wants to ask me some additional questions, and thank you.